Okay, thank you. Good morning. I'm Jane Royer. I'm the director of the Volunteer Center at Heart of West Michigan United Way. I am so pleased to be here today. It's funny for me because in my work, I interact with people from higher education, from the nonprofit world, from the corporate world, and this is the first time I can remember seeing everybody in the same place. And so I think it's really a wonderful opportunity for us to work together and figure out how to move forward in some of the work that we're doing in the community. I am presenting today with Dr. Wayne Sneath, who you met earlier, and our subject is skill-based volunteering. We want to talk about what skill-based volunteering is, why we think it's important to move in this direction, what are some of the best practices for skill-based volunteering. But then after that, we really want to give you some time to think from your organizational point of view. If you're a nonprofit, what skills do you need for your work? And then if you're a company or in higher education, what kind of skills do you have to offer? So we'll be doing a little bit of, just laying the groundwork for this, and then we'll give you some working time as well. Oops. I would like to start by setting the context for our conversation today, and I want you to take a minute to imagine that you are king or queen for the day, and you're able to offer your nonprofit everything they need in order to operate at the very highest level that they can. So I'd like for you to imagine that, and then think to yourself, what would your nonprofit be doing that you're currently unable to do? So if you would just take a minute and try to visualize that kind of scenario. Does somebody want to comment on what they thought about? We'll just take one comment. Anybody? Nothing came to mind? Okay.
I worked at a domestic violence shelter and used to cut out our children's service coordinator, so we don't have anybody doing anything with the kids specifically and needing children. So I was king or queen today. I would grant a person the money and the ability to take care of the kids.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So I imagine that many of you thought of those kind of possibilities. Maybe you would create new programs or expand your programs or do programs that you used to be able to do and can no longer afford. Maybe you would spread the message more about your service, improve your operations, improve your facilities, all of those kind of things. I think the good news is that no matter what it was that you were thinking of, I think that potential exists today. And for nonprofits, I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is, can we move from the perception that we commonly have of never having enough resources to one of abundant resources that are just waiting to be tapped? And the reason I say we have so many resources and assets coming to us are because of various trends that are occurring now, and I'm sure you're familiar with many of these. Examples might be that we have the baby boomers who are retiring. They're more skilled, more educated, have more time now, and really want to serve their communities. We have millennials who really have a very rich service ethic, and they want to give back to the community. Higher education people are doing work like never before. I was just truly blown away in that first session by all of the work that they do in community and their commitment to community service. And I think really an example is this summit that they are hosting for all of us today. I think it's really tremendous. But anyway, all of these assets are here for us, and now is the time, I think, that we can capture these things. So we can capture the talents of baby boomers, millennials, corporate employees, students, educators, professors, and we can do all this, I think, if we develop our skill-based volunteering programs. I'm going to, one more thing. So what are we really talking about when we talk about skill-based volunteering? We're talking about simply using business skills or education to impact the needs and the assets of a nonprofit organization and the people that it serves. So this is really the new volunteering, and we talk about it as skill-based volunteering now, but in a few years we won't talk about that at all, because this is the way people are going to volunteer in the future. And I'm going to play a little video for you of a woman in Vancouver who was sort of a leader in skill-based volunteering, and she talks about how we need to make this paradigm shift and how we need to develop more skill-based roles for the new volunteer.
I'm going to spend a few minutes here before we get into our working session talking about some best practice in skill-based volunteering programming. But these are some opening kind of considerations. As in any kind of project management within an organization or new program development, some of these things are probably not going to be that revolutionary to you, if you will. But assessing your own readiness internally for these kind of programs is a very important piece of this puzzle. And Jane, at the end of the session, will share with the nonprofits a particular instrument that can be used within your organization to begin that process. Project vetting. Is it a good match between the skill-based volunteers' desires and skills and a particular need within your organization, and actually somebody in your organization that can help to facilitate that and has some basic knowledge or understanding of the kind of end outcomes of the project. And another piece Jane will share will be a detailed position description for a skill-based volunteer. Designing those in a way that they're, one, appealing to bring people in the door, and two, interesting enough and they have enough connection with the organization to keep them moving through a project are also important considerations up front. Scalability, taking this program from maybe a few forays into this, a few partnerships with a corporation or a higher education institution in a focused way, to maybe doing skill-based volunteering assessment as part of your strategic planning within your organization annually. How might you look at where you want to be and what specific opportunities can come out of your strategic planning that could utilize skill-based volunteers. Assessment, when folks come in the door, making sure, again, there's a good fit. Folks may say they have the skill, but can they, like a job interview, when you're hiring an employee, you'd want to see they had the experience, right? They can actually produce the product. Same thing applies for a skill-based volunteer. And again, that's the matching process, I think, is really important. Your infrastructure organizationally, outcome measurement, which is a part of all of our worlds now. Our organizations want to see if we've invested staff resource, money, time, etc., into this work, what are our tangible outcomes? It's not only important for the skill-based project or the volunteer, but organizationally to justify why we would move away from a traditional volunteer approach. And then sustainability over the long term is another important consideration. What's that?
You want to have her just change that?
Oh, yeah, we could. Cool. Thanks. Yep. So what are some best practices? And there are a couple of organizations, corporate organizations. Deloitte has really been, some of the material here was pulled from that organization, has done a great job of creating a corporate skill-based volunteer program. And so if you're looking for resources, again, outside, they would be a very good, no matter on what side of the equation you're on. If you're a nonprofit looking to partner with corporate, or if you're corporate looking with nonprofit or even higher ed, can learn from the resources that Deloitte's put together to utilize the skills of their volunteers to meet community needs. But some of these basic best practices are, again, critical to consider. Do you have a common mission and values in the partnership? And try to think about partnership over the long term. You just heard a whole session on best practices in partnership. Goals and objectives. Clear buy-in from the organizational leadership As we mentioned, how do we justify that? Does it increase our capacity to serve clients? Does it bring money in the door through donations or grants? Does it help raise our awareness level in the community? Some of those are already maybe indicators or benchmarks you could begin to use to say, if you can track those in a way through the year, here are some key reasons or areas that I can use to justify the existence of this program. Program structure, Deloitte and policy and guidelines, they provide some very good information there. Communications, how do you talk about this kind of volunteering in a way differently than you do with your traditional volunteering? Many of you use volunteer solutions to communicate your opportunities, or you advertise volunteer opportunities on your website or in your newsletters or through events when you have fundraisers. How might you talk differently about this, and to whom should you be talking about it differently? If you're reaching out to a particular population of volunteers, where do you typically recruit your volunteers? Do you just kind of put out a general call and hope you get what you get? Or are you going to, in a skill-based opportunity, go to the places where you're most likely to find those kind of folks? So professional meetings, higher education conferences, things like that, where you can market what your opportunities are for people to engage your organization. Recognition of participants is really critical, and most of you, I'm sure, make some efforts to recognize the work of your volunteers. Projects that are completed are often maybe more easy to put out there as here's the product of a volunteer's work, rather than saying a volunteer has committed X number of hours over a period of time. This is what this volunteer has helped our organization to achieve. And evaluation we talked a little bit about by establishing some key indicators of the success of a skill-based volunteer program, any of those things that I mentioned earlier. Benefits are many on both sides to the nonprofit organization and the community. From a higher ed point of view, we're certainly trying to encourage students to be more civically engaged as part of their experience in college, and we hope that carries on through lifetime. There's increasing research that shows that's the case. We're still not there and definitive proof that that keeps people engaged over the course of a lifetime, but I think we're getting closer to understanding that that's actually the case. Certainly providing new talent through skill-based opportunities in higher ed, different perspective, fresh perspective, utilizing different methods of communication like social media, and just creating greater discussion and talk about all these different kinds of programs that are going on. And I think opportunities, as Jane said, like today of this kind of summit, to bring different constituencies together to begin to talk about what might be a good skill-based project, and how might we draw on all the resources? Can we bring together corporate higher ed and the nonprofit world? For our students in higher ed, we're certainly trying to encourage their professional development, their sense of responsibility, their teamwork, and these are all developmental skills to keep them moving through a period of time. A lot of them bring some of those skills because we have an increasingly large adult and returning population to higher ed institutions that are transitioning out of jobs into new jobs. So they have some very developed skill sets already, and if they're in school and they have these kind of requirements for the types of experiential learning that I talked about earlier this morning, you may have a really ready base there of an adult student volunteer who already has a skill base from a previous job and is transitioning or thinking about transitioning to a new job. Ultimately, we also hope to increase student and employee awareness of interest in the community, and we want to be accessible as higher ed institutions to the community and provide resources so that we do not appear as isolated from the community or purely academic, which is really what this whole movement has tried to do through the years, to bridge some of the gaps that have existed between higher education and the community. What's that? Oh, okay. Let's see. That's okay. There we go.
Okay. All right. One of the things we've done at the United Way is we've tried to highlight skill-based volunteering on our website, which is volunteercentergr.org. And so if you go in there, we'll actually be demonstrating this to you this afternoon, but you can list your skill-based opportunities in a separate database, and that way people can readily find those opportunities when they're looking for them. I also wanted to mention that we're starting to have focus groups with somebody from the community who, he's in the other session actually. His name is Steve German, and he is a manager, a former IT person at Herman Miller, and he is helping us to try to figure out exactly what we need in order to put a skill-based program in place. And so if any of you are from companies or higher ed and would like to be a part of that process and work with Steve, we'd love to have you. And at the second round of when we're doing this, we'll pull in some of the nonprofit organizations as well. And then finally, I would mention in your little packet of materials, the third sheet into the ones with the paperclip is an evaluation that I recently did, surveying some skill-based volunteers. And you can see that even though we just started this system in February, we're already seeing some results, and we're seeing a lot of people get connected through using our skill-based volunteer portion of our website. And so it's interesting to see the kind of skills that they brought to the table and some of the comments that they made after they got connected to their volunteer opportunity.
Quickly, here are a few examples of skill-based academic service learning projects that have been completed, just to get your mind starting to think about possibilities here. And this is certainly not exhaustive, but it does represent a wide spectrum of students' involvement through these kind of skill-based and project-oriented opportunities. We've had students in business courses and capstone courses write feasibility plans, strategic business plans for organizations, the kind of work that typically you would probably have to, if you don't have internal expertise to do that in your organization, to hire a consultant to do. So under the supervision of a faculty member that has had experience in this, students will produce these plans. They are substantial pieces of work typically. Market research, projections of growth, budgets, recommendations for implementation, a lot of things that you may not have the internal expertise or the time, probably more likely, to do. Marketing plans have been done for a lot of organizations in e-marketing or strategic marketing. Promotional materials, grant writing. Almost every institution has either a grant writing class or a professional writing class that can take on projects to produce those kind of written materials for your organization. We've had students out working in the public schools through programs like Junior Achievement, technology students working on web pages, databases, integrating social networking. We have courses now in social networking and communications and other areas, so having tangible projects to help organizations use those means to reach out to their constituents. Event management through human resource programs. And health screenings through health programs, whether nursing students are doing education or working in other kinds of health or wellness training opportunities in the community. Also, Davenport, as a plug, has a health information technology and management program, which really helps organizations that work with clients in health, providing health services to get their record-keeping systems up, functional, and moving forward. So these are only a few of the kind of skill-based and project-based opportunities. Very initial steps, and we've only scratched the surface on best practice and establishing these kind of programs. We want to give you time to start thinking about possibilities. Obviously, within a nonprofit, appointing a key person, a primary coordinator, whether that be the volunteer manager, or I would encourage maybe a greater staff discussion, executive director, even board, when you start talking about skill-based opportunities, because what is the strategic direction of the organization that could utilize very specific skills of folks in the community? Readiness assessment, Jane will share with you later. Detailed position descriptions that have those tangible outcomes. Most of you have position descriptions for your regular volunteers. Skill-based ones are slightly different, I think more detailed. From the corporate or higher ed side of things, internally there needs to be some clear coordination. We are typically the point people on campuses for service experiences, but be aware that even in our own organizations, We don't always communicate as well with each other as we could. We're trying to do a better job with that, but you may hear from professors, you may hear from different divisions. Typically, though, and increasingly, this work is being centralized within higher ed so that 1 or 2 offices are responsible for outreach, if you will, to the community. And then from a corporate or higher ed perspective, your own internal needs assessment. What can you bring forward as skills through academic service learning, internships, or other possibilities? Together in the partnership formation, there needs to be a good match between the skills brought by the volunteers and obviously the needs of the organization, and to follow the best practices of program development and partnership development. What we want to do for the last 15 minutes or so is we have a couple of worksheets that will get you, depending on your perspective, to start thinking about what kind of skills do you think, if you're a corporate or higher ed representative, what do you think your employees, your students, et cetera, could bring to community projects? If you're a nonprofit organization, what do you think are your greatest needs for skill-based opportunities? And we've provided kind of a checklist, if you will, of opportunities. They're not exhaustive of the kinds of things that are possible, but they might get your head thinking about some of the kind of things that you don't typically think of for volunteers. And there's a section there for other projects. What we're going to have you do is spend, I said, probably 10 minutes or so just brainstorming. We'll share it as a group, see if we can start to make some connections between the corporate and higher ed and the nonprofit organizations. And then Jane will finish up with some discussions of that readiness assessment for skill-based volunteering and position descriptions. Jane, which one do you have?
There are 2 other things in your packet that I'd like to call your attention to. One is a skill-based readiness assessment. This is for you, nonprofits, to take and do back at the office. It will help you to think through if your organization is ready to use skill-based volunteers or what you might have to do in order to get ready. So it wouldn't take you long to complete, and I think it would really be helpful to you. And then secondly, I've included a couple of example job descriptions. And you'll notice that these job descriptions are a little bit different maybe than what you've used before. As Lee said, it was very important for skill-based volunteers to have flexibility. So that time commitment is really important to set up front. And then too, I think it's important for skill-based to be sure that you outline your deliverables. And you can see on those job descriptions that they have very specific outcomes that they're looking for, very specific expectations of those volunteers. So those are just a couple of things that would be helpful to you. And I would say once more that we are working on that, putting together a focus group of corporate and higher ed people who want to work on developing some templates for everybody to use for skill-based volunteering. So if you're interested in that, please let me know, and we'd be happy to include you. And then later on, we'll be reaching out to some of the nonprofits to include them in that process as well. Just trying to make things a little more simpler, or a little simpler, so that everybody doesn't have to do kind of the groundwork for these programs. So thank you so much.
Okay, I think that is the end of our session, so we appreciate your time with us. I want to make a plug for a couple of the sessions this afternoon. I know sometimes we lose folks after lunch. There's going to be a great session on funding for civic engagement and partnership through the Michigan Community Service Commission, which provides grant opportunities for partnerships among higher education institutions, corporations, and nonprofit organizations. And then Jane is going to be doing a session with some of her staff and Janelle from Arbor Circle on the more of the nuts and bolts of the volunteer solutions system and the skill-based portion of that. So right now we are moving on to lunch, and I think Sierra is going to lead all of you back over to the multipurpose room for lunch. So I hope we'll see you here this afternoon. Thanks.